In the Wild West, where the land is unforgiving and the sky is cruelly vast, a creature's worth is measured in muscle and grit. But at the Hope Valley Ranch, amidst the powerful stallions and burly cattle, one small soul seemed born out of place. They called him Runt. It wasn't a name of affection, but of mockery. Runt was small, scrawny, his coat a dull, lifeless brown. He was a flawed brushstroke on the ranch's perfect canvas of strength, a forgotten shadow in the farthest corner of the corral, earning only glares from the larger horses and cold indifference from his owner, Jedediah. To Jedediah, a pragmatic man of the earth, Runt wasn't just a disappointment. He was a burden, a wasteful mouth to feed. But one pair of eyes saw past the scrawny frame. Lily, Jedediah's 6-year-old daughter, would sneak him sweet carrots and whisper childish secrets into his ears. Their quiet bond was the only warmth the little horse had ever known. Little did they know this fragile loyalty was about to be tested by the West's most unforgiving trial, a trial that would decide the fate of them all. In the Wild West, where the land is unforgiving and the sky is a cruelly vast canvas of blue, a creature's worth is measured in muscle and grit. At the Hope Valley Ranch, value was a simple, brutal equation of what a body could pull, endure, or produce. And then there was Runt. He was a misplaced whisper in a world that shouted, a creature of soft edges in a land of sharp rock. From the far corner of the corral, the world was a parade of intimidating shapes, the titanic haunches of the Clydesdales that pulled the plows, the sleek, nervous energy of the cow ponies, and the looming silhouette of the man they all obeyed, Jedediah. To Runt, the ranch owner was not a face but a pair of dust-caked boots that moved with impatient purpose and a booming voice that never once called his name. The other horses, smelling the indifference of the master, treated him with casual contempt. A sharp nip at his flank sent him scattering from the water trough. A hard shove pushed him from the meager shade of the lone cottonwood. He learned the language of survival: stay small, stay quiet, stay away. His world was the splintered fence posts and the taste of dust, a constant low hum of loneliness in his bones. Look at him. Hank Jedediah's voice cut through the afternoon haze. The boots had stopped near the fence. Runt froze, trying to melt into the wood, taking up space, eating feed. Got no pull, no speed. He's a mistake. Hank, a lanky ranch hand with kind wrinkles around his eyes, spat a stream of tobacco juice. Just a little fella, boss. Might fill out. Might not, Jedediah grunted the sound final. And this land ain't got no room for might nots. Winter's comin'. The words were a cold wind, a promise of a future that grew shorter with every passing day. Runt felt the finality in that tone, a closing door he didn't know how to stop. This was his existence, a calculation on a ledger trending toward zero. But then a different presence would arrive, silent as a sunbeam. Lily. She was a flash of yellow ribbon and the scent of sweet clover. Jedediah's 6-year-old daughter was the ranch's secret, a spot of impossible softness in its hardened world. And to Runt, she was everything. She never approached with a rope or a shout. Her feet were light on the earth. She would press her small face between the rails, her breath warm. Hello, Storm, she'd whisper her chosen name for him, a secret treasure. Today, her small hand held a prize, a stolen carrot snapped in two. Runt's velvet nose trembled as he took the offering, the sweetness and explosion of impossible joy on his tongue. He was not Runt to her. He was Storm. He was a keeper of secrets, a friend. Don't you listen to them, she murmured, her fingers scratching the itchy spot behind his ears he could never reach. You're not a mistake. You're my brave little Storm. You just haven't shown them yet. He leaned into her touch, a deep, shuddering sigh escaping him. For these few minutes he wasn't a burden. He was a storm, a secret, a reason for a small, warm hand to seek him out. This quiet bond forged in whispered words and stolen treats was the only anchor he had in a world determined to cast him adrift. Later, as twilight began to paint the canyon walls in shades of bruised purple, Lily crouched behind a large rain barrel near the porch, her small form hidden in the growing shadows. Her father's voice drifted from the house, a low rumble directed at her mother Martha. "It's simple arithmetic, Martha. That horse costs more than he's worth." "He has a gentle spirit," Jed, came Martha's softer reply. "A gentle spirit don't pull a plow through frozen earth." Jedediah's voice was hard stripped of all sentiment. "If we're choosing between feeding him and feeding this family come January, it ain't a choice." Lily's breath hitched. She didn't understand arithmetic, but she understood the chilling finality in her father's voice. She understood the word January now sounded like a threat. A cold dread, sharp and terrifying, filled her small chest. She fled. Her bare feet were silent on the path to the corral. Runt saw her coming, a small, desperate ghost in the dying light. She squeezed through the rails and threw her arms around his neck, her small body trembling with silent sobs. He stood perfectly still, his heart thumping against his ribs. He felt the salt of her tears seep into his coat, a silent, desperate promise. "I won't let him," she whispered, her voice fierce and broken. "I won't." He was her secret friend, her brave little storm. But as the last light bled from the sky and the first coyote howled its lonely song to the rising moon, a question hung in the cold air, sharp as a shard of ice in a land that devoured the weak. Could the love of a little girl truly be enough to save him? The beauty of the West is sometimes a sweet, treacherous trap. It offers up a sun so brilliant it feels like a blessing, scattering diamonds across the tall prairie grass and warming the earth until it breathes a scent of sweet dust and life. It was on such an afternoon that Lily, her heart light in her father's grim words from the night before, a forgotten shadow chased a dream. A flash of impossible blue. A creature of stained glass wings, a sapphire come to life, dancing on the currents of the warm air. A morpho. She had only ever seen one in a tattered book in her mother's collection. To see one here in Hope Valley was a miracle. And so she ran. Her small legs pumped her laughter, a bright chime carried on the breeze. She ran past the familiar boundary of the last fence post, her world a blur of green and gold. The butterfly led her on a fickle guide, dancing just beyond her fingertips. It led her away from the sounds of the ranch, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of cattle, and into the silence of the rolling hills. Here the rocks were friendly giants sunning themselves, and the wind in the tall pines whispered secrets only she could hear. She was not a rancher's daughter. She was an explorer in a land of magic. The butterfly, its game concluded, fluttered high over a ridge of jagged rock and vanished, a final taunting flash of blue against the endless sky. Lily stopped her chest, heaving a triumphant smile on her face. And then for the first time she truly saw where she was. The sun was no longer directly overhead. It was a fiery orange orb sinking fast behind the western peaks, pulling long, menacing shadows from the rocks. The friendly giants now seemed to lean forward, their faces dark and leering. The wind was no longer a whisper. It was a low, mournful howl that stole the warmth from her skin. "Mama," she called out, her voice small, swallowed instantly by the vast, indifferent space. The familiar shapes of the barn and the house were gone. There was nothing but an ocean of swaying grass and rising stone, all painted in the deepening bruised colors of twilight. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of her wonder. She turned, but every direction looked the same. She was a tiny lost ship on a vast, lonely sea. Back at the ranch, the call was a simple one, a rhythm of daily life. Lily Martha called from the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Supper's on." Silence answered her. Not the playful silence of a child hiding, but a deep, unnerving quiet. "Lily," she called again, a thread of impatience sharpening her tone. She walked to the barn, peering into the hayloft. She checked the creek bed, her steps quickening. The sun was touching the horizon now, and the ranch was bathed in a blood-orange light. A mother's intuition, older and more primal than any clock, began to scream. She ran her apron flying behind her to the far fields where Jedediah was mending a fence line, his movements slow and methodical. He saw her coming, saw the frantic look in her eyes, and dropped his tools, his own heart lurching with a sudden sickening dread. "She's gone, Jed," Martha gasped, grabbing his arm. "I can't find her anywhere. She's gone." The hardened practical rancher vanished. In his place stood a father, his face a mask of raw terror. He didn't comfort, he commanded. The fear was a fire in his gut, and action was the only way to keep it from consuming him. "Where did you see her last?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Think. By the corral. Maybe an hour ago." He didn't wait for more. He sprinted toward the bunkhouse, his voice a roar that brought the ranch hands running. "She's gone, lost saddle, the best horses. Jones, you and Hank head north, Bill with me, we take the east. Grab the lanterns, move, damn you, move." The ranch exploded into a controlled chaos of creaking leather jingling spurs and shouted orders. In the middle of it all, Jedediah strode past the far corral. He saw Runt, strangely agitated, pacing the fence line. His head raised, his nostrils flaring as if catching a scent on the wind from the very hills they were about to search. Jedediah didn't see a sign. He saw a nuisance. With a curse, he grabbed the heavy wooden gate and slammed it shut, the sound a final dismissive bang. "Stay out of the way," he muttered, turning his back on the frantic little horse. He swung onto his own powerful stallion, his face grim, a lantern already lit in his hand. The search party thundered out of the ranch, a line of determined men on powerful horses, their lights small flickering flames against an immense encroaching darkness. They rode with muscle, with experience, with the best that Hope Valley had to offer. But they rode blind into a wilderness that held its secrets tight. Left behind in the gathering dark was the only creature who carried the scent of a lost little girl in his heart, his desperate, unheard whinnies swallowed by a wind that was beginning to sound like a lament, a wind that was bringing the cold, hard night of despair. The night in the west does not merely fall. It hunts. It devours the light, swallowing the horizon and bleeding the color from the land, until all that remains are shades of black and a deep, star-bruised indigo. It was into the teeth of this predator that Jedediah and his men rode their lanterns, cutting small, desperate holes in a blanket of absolute blackness. The wind was a living thing. It was a thief that stole the warmth from their coats and the words from their mouths. It was a trickster that twisted the familiar shapes of the landscape into monstrous silhouettes and carried the howls of distant coyotes directly to the back of their necks, making them sound as if they were just over the next rise. For hours they fought a losing battle against the land. Hope would flare, sharp and bright, only to be extinguished. "Got something here, boss." Hank's voice was a triumphant crackle in the cold. A footprint. By this creosote bush, Jedediah would throw himself from his horse, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, kneeling in the dirt to examine the tiny, shallow impression. It was hers. A wave of relief, so potent it was dizzying, would wash over him. Which way? Which way does it point? But the wind would answer. It would sweep down from the high mesas a vast invisible hand, and in a swirl of dust and dead leaves the footprint would be gone. Erased, as if it had never been there at all. Each time it happened, a piece of Jedediah's soul chipped away, leaving him colder than the night air. He was a man built of grit and certainty, a man who believed that with enough will and enough work, any problem could be solved, any field could be tamed. But you could not put a harness on the wind. You could not break the spirit of a wilderness that did not even know you were there. Powerlessness was a new and bitter poison in his veins. His mind, a frantic, terrified thing, kept replaying a single image from that very morning, Lily, sitting on the top rail of the corral fence, her small legs kicking, her head thrown back in a laugh as she watched Runt clumsily chase a grasshopper. The sun had caught in her hair, turning it into a halo. A halo. The thought was a shard of glass in his heart. "She's so small," he murmured to himself, the words torn from him by a gust of wind. The memory of her fragility fueled a rage that burned through his exhaustion. He spurred his horse onward, shouting at his men, his voice raw with a desperation that bordered on madness. They checked every ravine, every shallow cave, every thicket of thorny mesquite, their calls of Lily growing hoarse, swallowed by the immense echoing silence. They were chasing ghosts. It was Hank who finally broke the spell of frantic motion. They had reached a wide windswept mesa, a flat table of rock where no track could ever hold, where the wind reigned supreme. The horses were lathered, their heads hanging low. The men were slumped in their saddles, their faces etched with a bone-deep weariness. Boss Hank said, his voice quiet, respectful, but firm as the rock beneath them. "Jed, there's nothing more we can do till sunrise. The horses are done. We're blind out here." "She's not a ghost," Jedediah roared, wheeling his horse around to face him, his eyes wild in the lantern light. "She's my little girl. We keep looking, and we will." Hank countered, his gaze steady, refusing to back down. "Come first light. But right now we're just going to get ourselves lost or ride a horse off a ledge. We can't help her if we're dead, Jed." The brutal logic of it hit Jedediah like a physical blow. He looked at the faces of his men, seeing his own despair reflected in their eyes. He had pushed them to their limit. He had pushed himself past it, and it wasn't enough. The land had won. The ride back to the ranch was a slow, funereal procession. The energy, the rage, the desperate hope, it had all bled out onto the cold stones of the mesa, leaving only a hollow, aching void. No one spoke. The only sounds were the tired plodding of hooves and the ceaseless mocking cry of the wind. When the faint lights of the ranch house appeared, Jedediah couldn't bring himself to ride all the way in. He couldn't face Martha. He couldn't walk into the warm house that was now a cold, empty tomb without his daughter's laughter. He dismounted by the main corral, handing the reins to a silent Hank. Hope was a dying ember, and the great, strong heart of the Hope Valley Ranch was broken. Jedediah leaned his arms against the top rail, the rough wood digging into his skin, and stared into the abyss of the dark, believing all was lost. The wind howled, and for a moment he could have sworn it whispered her name. He never once looked down at the forgotten undersized horse standing vigil just feet away. He didn't see Runt, who had stood there for hours, his small body utterly still, his head raised, staring into the same hostile darkness. He didn't notice that the little horse wasn't defeated. He was listening, waiting. His small, loyal heart still beating in time with a trail only he could sense, a trail that led directly into the terrifying waiting dark. When the hope of men dies, instinct ancient and true takes its first breath. Jedediah stood by the corral, a statue carved from grief, his spirit flayed by the relentless wind. He was blind to everything but the vast, hungry darkness that had taken his daughter. But inside the fence, Runt was not still. The world for him was not a landscape of rock and shadow. It was a map of scent, a story told on the air. And the saddest chapter, the one that screamed of terror and loneliness, was drifting in on the wind. It was the scent of Lily, not the happy scent of clover and sunlight that clung to her dresses, but the sharp metallic odor of her fear. It was a cry for help that only he could hear. He paced the fence line, a frantic, desperate energy coiling in his small frame. His fear of the bigger horses, of the master's heavy hand, was a distant memory. A new, more powerful force had taken hold: loyalty. A promise whispered to him in secret, sealed with a carrot. Then it came. A stronger gust of wind, a mischievous eddy that danced through the corral, carrying with it a small, precious treasure. A scrap of blue ribbon torn from Lily's hair landed just inside the fence. The scent was overwhelming. It was a command, a clarion call. It broke him. With a desperate cry that was half whinny, half groan, Runt threw himself at the gate. The wood shuddered. The heavy latch rattled. The other horses snorted, moving away from the mad little creature, their eyes wide with sleepy confusion. He was breaking the first rule of the herd: be still, be quiet, do not draw the attention of the masters. Again, he charged, his small shoulder slamming into the wood. Pain shot through him, but it was nothing compared to the urgency burning in his soul. He could smell her fear. He could feel her smallness in the vast, cold night. A splintering sound. The wood groaned in protest. With one final shuddering heave, the latch gave way. The gate swung inward with a crash that shattered the ranch's exhausted silence. Jedediah spun around, his grief momentarily eclipsed by a surge of raw anger. The worthless horse. The final insult on a night of utter failure. "Get back in there, you worthless nag!" he roared, his voice cracking with strain. "Now's no time for this." A light flared in the bunkhouse, and Bill, one of the younger hands, came running out, pulling on his boots. "I'll get him, boss. Don't you worry." But Runt didn't run wild. He didn't bolt for the open plains in a blind panic. He moved with a chilling, unshakable purpose. He trotted past the bunkhouse, past the water trough, straight to the edge of the ranch yard where the tamed earth gave way to the untamed wild. And there he stopped. He turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto Jedediah's. And he called out. It was not the powerful ringing call of a stallion. It was a sharp, piercing neigh, high and clear and desperate. It was a sound stripped of all fear, filled with an intelligence and an urgent plea that cut through Jedediah's wall of despair. It was not a sound of distress. It was a summons. "Follow me." Bill skidded to a halt, unsure. Jedediah stood frozen, the world narrowing to the space between him and the strange little horse. His mind, his logic, his entire lifetime of experience told him this was madness. A spooked horse, nothing more. His men, his best trackers, his strongest mounts, they had all failed. What could this mistake, possibly do? He looked into Runt's eyes. He saw no panic there. He saw a certainty that shamed his own broken hope. He saw a path. His own expertise had led him to a dead end. His strength had brought him nothing but an empty heart. His reason had abandoned him in the dark. What was left? "I've gone plumb loco." He breathed the words, a faint mist in the cold air. "Bill," he said, his voice quiet, strange. "Hold on. Let him be." He took a step forward, then another, his boots crunching in the dirt. He walked past the bunkhouse, past the stunned ranch hand, and straight toward the horse. He didn't stop until he was just a few feet away, the horse's pleading call still echoing in his soul. "All right, boy," Jedediah whispered, his voice raw, broken. It was the first time he had ever spoken to the horse with anything other than a curse. "All right. What is it you know?" Runt let out one more soft whinny, a sound of acknowledgement, then turned and started walking, a small, determined silhouette against the vast, waiting darkness of the hills. Jedediah took a deep, shuddering breath. "Show me," he said to the empty air. "You show me the way." He left logic and reason shattered on the ground beside the broken gate. He was a man with nothing left to lose, placing his faith not in strength or skill, but in the desperate, inexplicable plea in the eyes of a worthless horse. As the two figures, one large and one small, were swallowed by the hostile dark, a new journey began, not a search, but a pilgrimage, led by the one creature who remembered the path when all others had forgotten it. There are paths not measured in miles, but in heartbeats. Paths that cannot be traveled with strength, but with a loyalty that burns brighter than any lantern. Jedediah, a man who had spent his life on the wide-open trails, was now walking a path he could not see, following a guide he had never trusted. He was following a fool's hope, and the fool was a half-starved horse. For the first hour, doubt was a bitter taste in his mouth. Every step his worn boots took was a testament to his own madness. Runt led him away from the open flats and gentle slopes the search party had covered, turning instead toward the broken, jagged country that clawed at the edges of the valley. The horse moved with an unnerving confidence, a silent flow of motion in the deep dark. Then they came to the first test, a steep, treacherous slope of loose shale, a place where a larger horse would struggle for purchase its weight, a dangerous liability. Jedediah's heart sank. This was it, the dead end. No horse would choose this way. He muttered, his voice swallowed by the wind. No sane horse. But Runt did not hesitate. He lowered his head, his small, nimble hooves testing the ground, finding purchase where there seemed to be none. He moved not with power, but with a delicate, intelligent precision, zigzagging up the slope like a mountain goat. He was not fighting the land. He was reading it. Jedediah was forced to climb on his hands and knees, the shale shifting under his weight, his lungs burning. When he finally hauled himself to the top, breathless and sweating despite the cold, Runt was waiting for him, his sides heaving, his dark eyes patient. "Well, I'll be damned." Jedediah breathed a grudging respect, cutting through his despair. "Look at you go." He saw it then. The horse's size, the very thing he had cursed as a weakness, was its greatest strength here in the unforgiving heart of the wild. They continued on deeper into a labyrinth of stone. They came to a narrow crevice between two towering slabs of granite, a shortcut invisible from the main trail. Runt squeezed through his small frame, passing with inches to spare. Jedediah had to turn sideways, the cold, rough stone scraping his shoulders, the feeling of being trapped closing in. He was in a world not meant for men of his size, a world built on a scale only this little horse could navigate. His perception began to shift, to crumble. He was no longer following Runt, the mistake. He was following a creature of incredible will. He remembered Lily's secret name for the horse, a name he'd overheard once and dismissed as childish fantasy. Storm. "All right, Storm." Jedediah found himself whispering the name, feeling strange and foreign, yet somehow right on his tongue. He was speaking to the horse as an equal, a partner in this desperate quest. "That's a good name for you." "What now, little Storm? Which way now?" The horse seemed to understand. He nudged Jedediah's hand with his nose, a brief, warm touch of encouragement, then turned toward a dark, forbidding canyon pass. The entrance was choked with a rockfall, a jumble of massive boulders that made it utterly impassable. This was where any search party, any sane man would have turned back for good. A fresh wave of hopelessness washed over Jedediah. It was over. But Runt-Nosed Storm did not see a dead end. He walked to the edge of the rockfall. He did not try to climb it. He nudged a smaller, loose rock with his hoof. He sniffed the air, testing the subtle currents. Then he turned sharply left, pushing his way through a thicket of thorny bushes Jedediah hadn't even noticed. Behind it was a faint, narrow trail, barely wide enough for a single animal. A hidden path. A secret way around. It was in that moment that Jedediah's transformation was complete. This was not just animal instinct. This was intelligence. This was loyalty made manifest, a force of nature in its own right. A fierce, protective pride surged in his chest, so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. This was his horse. This was Lily's Storm. And he was a miracle. After winding their way around the rockfall, they emerged into a small hidden basin, a perfect bowl of land sheltered from the wind. The air here was suddenly still. The silence was absolute. Storm stopped dead. His whole body went rigid. His ears, which had been swiveling to catch every sound, now locked forward, aimed like twin pistols at a dense, dark thicket of twisted juniper trees at the far end of the basin. He could smell her. Not just the memory on a ribbon, but her living presence. He lifted his head and let out a soft, low whinny. Jedediah's heart stopped. The sound was not a question. It was not a call of desperation. It was an answer. It was the sound of a promise kept. He looked toward the dark, silent thicket, every muscle in his body tensing. He didn't know if he would find his daughter alive, or if this was merely the end of their tragic trail. But as he took a step forward, his hand trembling as he reached for the pistol at his hip, a new fear gripped him colder than any before. What if the wild things of the night had found her first? The last steps of any journey are the heaviest. Hope and terror, two wolves at war within his soul, tore at Jedediah with every move he made toward the dark, silent thicket. The world had shrunk to this single terrifying point of discovery. His pistol felt heavy and useless in his hand. What good was a gun against the ghosts of his own failure? He pushed aside a thick, gnarled juniper branch. The darkness within was absolute. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then his eyes adjusted, and his heart broke. There, in a small protected hollow formed by the ancient roots of the tree, was Lily. She was curled into a tight ball, her face pale and streaked with the ghostly tracks of tears. She was asleep. She was perfect. She was alive. The strength went out of Jedediah's legs. He fell to his knees, a sound that was half sob, half gasp torn from his throat. The fear that had been a burning iron in his gut for hours finally gave way, releasing a flood of relief so potent it left him weak and trembling. Lily! He whispered the name, a prayer. At the sound of his voice she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open wide with confusion, then recognition. "Daddy, I'm here, sweetheart," he choked out, crawling into the hollow and gathering her small, cold body into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I'm here now." She clung to him, and then her eyes shifted, looking past his shoulder. A smile, bright and pure, lit up her tired face. "Storm, you found me. I knew you would." Storm, no longer runt in any world, real or imagined, pushed his head gently past Jedediah, nuzzling Lily's cheek with a soft, rumbling sigh. He had kept his promise. The journey home was a silent, sacred procession. As the first rays of dawn broke over the canyons, painting the sky in strokes of rose and gold, the hostile landscape of the night was reborn into a place of breathtaking beauty. Jedediah placed Lily carefully on Storm's back. The little horse, though visibly exhausted, straightened his spine, carrying his precious cargo with an unwavering, quiet pride. Jedediah walked beside them, his calloused hand never leaving Storm's neck, a constant, reverent touch. It was no longer a master and an animal. It was a man and his savior. "He kept me safe," Daddy Lily said, her voice small, but clear in the crisp morning air. "I heard the coyotes. They were close, but Storm stood right there at the front of my hiding spot. He stomped his feet and wouldn't let them get close." Jedediah looked at the little horse, at the scrapes on his legs and the sheer loyal grit in his eyes. The boy hadn't just found her. He had protected her all night long. "I know, sweetheart," Jedediah said, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer contain. "He's a hero. A true hero." When they emerged from the hills, a single figure leading a small horse carrying a child, the ranch fell into a stunned silence. Then a single shout erupted from the bunkhouse, and the silence was shattered by a wave of joyous, disbelieving celebration. The men surrounded them, but Jedediah held up a hand. He led Storm and Lily to the very center of the yard, into the spot where the strongest stallions were usually shown off. "Our trackers failed," Jedediah said, his voice ringing with a new humbled authority. "Our best horses failed." He looked at the crowd, his gaze unflinching. This horse saved her. He saved us all. Later that day, after Lily was safe in her mother's arms, Jedediah walked to the far corral. He took down the crude, faded plank that marked it as the place for runts and outcasts. He carried it to the main barn, to the largest, cleanest stall, the one always reserved for a prize winner. With slow, deliberate strikes of his hammer, he nailed up a new sign carved from a fresh piece of pine, the letters dark and clear for all to see. It did not say runt. It did not say storm. It said, the guide. The West was still a harsh and unforgiving land. Winters would still be cruel, and life would always be a fight. But the heart of Hope Valley had been healed, its greatest lesson learned not from its strongest, but from its smallest. They learned that sometimes the greatest strength is not in the power to pull a plow, but in the loyalty to follow a hidden trail, and that the most valuable creature on a ranch isn't always the one that costs the most, but the one who guides you home.